It is the one and only Garland Nixon, my favorite American commentator, because I wanted to ask Garland what's the reaction to the two big stories of the war and the royal demise. And he joins me now kindly. Thank you, Garland, for that. Let's start with the royal demise. I saw the flags at half-mast in Pennsylvania Avenue. I saw both Biden and Trump give effusive tribute to Queen Elizabeth II. How does it play in Peoria, though? What's the man and woman in the street in America thinking about this?
Well, I think that there's a mixture going on here now because, of course, there are the traditionalists who are certainly respecting the Queen and her reign and her passing. However, particularly now with what's going on in Ukraine, there's also a discussion about empire, a discussion about the reality and brutality of empire. I also think there's a discussion about who should be held responsible because, if you look at the Twitter sphere, I'll just put it like this: people of color or people whose backgrounds come from some of the countries that were brutally oppressed by various colonialist empires throughout Europe and the U.S. The conversation is totally differently. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the anger is directed towards the Queen when in my opinion, the Queen is representative, metaphorically representative of the empire. She didn't just make the decisions on her own. But I do see a what I think productive conversation going on, not so much in the mainstream media, but with the man and woman on the street, a conversation about empire. And now I had one more other thing, the contradiction between
Garland,
Sure.
there's a profound misunderstanding about the power which the monarch now has in Britain and has had for a very long time. The empire and the crimes of empire were not committed by the person of Queen Elizabeth. First of all, the worst of them, though there were plenty bad ones afterwards, the worst of them were committed long before she was born. She was born in 1926, after all. The entire Victorian period was a period of high crime against humanity carried out in the name of empire. And moreover, in that period, the Queen had far more power than Queen Elizabeth ever had. The government made the decisions about the crimes that were committed in Malaya in the 1950s, in Kenya in the 1950s, elsewhere in the empire, in Yemen in the 1950s and 60s, not the Queen. As a matter of fact, when the Queen fought tooth and nail with Margaret Thatcher to suspend apartheid South Africa from the Commonwealth, it was the elected government that were defeated by the Queen, who insisted, in deference to Black African opinion, that sanctions on South Africa must be supported by the Commonwealth. So I don't mean to give you a civics lesson, but honestly, the Queen doesn't get to decide the colour of the wallpaper in the British Parliament. Never mind the decisions of the British Parliament. Over to you.
I agree with you. I think that's why a nuanced conversation is very important. The anger towards the Queen, I would argue, is not really directed to her. It's directed to the empire, and she metaphorically represents the empire. So all the anger flows towards her, and particularly at a time. Let's add this: at a time when the U.S. empire has pretty much taken the reins of the Anglo-Saxon UK empire, and it is taking actions that severely negatively affect the people. So I think it's good to have this discussion. I'm glad we're having it. I think it's unfortunate that the anger is focused on her, but I think as we kind of nuance it and we can get people to understand that an empire is run by a kind of conglomeration of oligarchs as opposed to of the Queen.
Yeah, there is no doubt that the wealth that the British Empire looted from around the world, which included black people in our own country, in your country, in the Caribbean, and so on, the wealth in people and in things that we looted from the empire is still visible on the head of King Charles. The big, beautiful diamond, the African star, was stolen from Africa, as the name suggests, and is valued at more than £500 million, which is a lot of money to be carrying around on your head.
I've lost George. Certainly. So I think that I agree with you, and I think what's happening is that the people in what's considered, what's third world now, we call it developing nations, are starting to. I'll put it like this: a scab has been opened up, a scab has been unloosened, and the bleeding is starting to come out, and I think it's going to also affect attitudes towards the Ukraine military conflict, also, in that a lot of the countries, once again, in reminding and thinking back to what's happened to them from the colonial powers, are going to be more likely to say, we don't want another dose of this. Um, yeah, no problem. Also, I think that one of the things that's coming out now, that's as a result of this discussion, is the contradiction between empire and democracy. You can have an empire with a monarchy. You can have an empire with a dictator of any type, because as a rule, empires do not act in the best interest of the constituents of the empire. They act in the best interest of a small group of people. So as long as you have central control, very powerful central control in the empire, you're able to do that, because it doesn't matter if the people push back. And now what we're seeing is an empire in the United States that wants to create the illusion of democracy in Western Europe and the illusion of democracy in the U.S., but yet still prosecute the policies of an empire worldwide. And now that those policies are not, the policies are not really working to benefit the people in the empire, they're starting to question, hey, is this a democracy? They're starting to try to believe that they can execute democratic principles. So now people are starting to say, well, wait a minute, okay, this is a democracy, so our leaders have to act on our behalf. Our leaders will act on our behalf. And they beseech their leaders for redress. Hey, will you act on our behalf? And the leaders in Europe are simply saying, no, we won't. We're not beholden to you. You don't understand. This was always the illusion of a democracy. This was never democracy. There was the illusion of independence. There was the illusion of sovereignty. There was the illusion of democracy, but there was never really democracy. So that contradiction is coming out now that people are, so now that people are, right, are certainly, now that people are realizing that. We're going to go to a break. We got a little bit of things we got to handle here, and we will be right back. You're listening to the mother of all talk shows.
Now, you might not have noticed, due to the consummate professionalism of the broadcasting superstar that is Garland Nixon, but I was power cutted. I don't know if it was in response to any perceived lèse-majesté in the opening part of the show on my part, or it was Ukrainian retaliation for the Russian power cuts that have reduced all of Ukraine outside of the Russian-held areas into darkness this evening. But I literally was plunged into darkness with no power at all. I got a taste of what the poor people of Ukraine are experiencing this evening. But the show must go on, and Garland kept the show going on, and I'll be forever grateful to him for that. On the point I was just making, going back to the Queen, Garland, is that the Star of Africa, worth £500 million, is on the front of the King Charles's new crown. And on top of it is the Kohinoor diamond, which is literally priceless, which, as the name suggests, was stolen from India, though they probably stole it from Persia, and so it goes on. So it's no part of my case that the British Empire was not responsible for looting and mass murder and enslavement for centuries. Now that's your job in the United States, of course, rather than ours for the most part. One empire has passed seamlessly to another. It's just important, as we've both agreed, to attribute the blame to the system and to the oligarchs, to the power cliques that made themselves royal and aristocratic in the first place, after all. I remember the late and great Tony Benn used to say, how did the establishment become established? They killed each other and stole each other's lands and castles and wives and daughters. They engaged in wholesale looting, murder and rapine, and then began to call themselves by titles. And before you knew it, they were princesses and queens.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the same thing here. You have to understand the system, and you have to attribute blame properly where it is. I certainly understand. Let me give you an example. Joe Biden right now, you could look at the United States and say, well, look at these terrible things that the U.S. is doing, and I'm not happy with it. And you could say, look what Biden's doing. But the reality is, there are people who argue this is the second iteration of the Obama administration. I say no, it's the fourth iteration of the George W. Bush administration. So, if Joe Biden disappeared into an alternative universe tomorrow, and Donald Trump took over, I don't know that anyone could change the direction of this system. And here's the evidence. The Queen of England has passed away. The system's not going to change. It's not going to suddenly become better or worse or anything. She was there, and she was a person who represented the system, but I'm not personally angry at her. I don't think if she'd never been born, these things wouldn't have happened, or they would have been, even worse under her leadership. So I think it is important to understand that, and always understand your struggle is against the system, not any particular person who either represents the leadership of the system at a particular time, or who actually leads the system at the time. And I don't think either the Queen or Joe Biden lead these systems that they are representing at this time.
Sitting atop of, yeah. Speaking of past presidents, I see that Barack Obama's portrait was unveiled in the White House. I don't know if it's the portrait of Dorian Gray, whether it will turn really ugly as a result of all the ugly things that he did. But I take your point about the fourth iteration of the George W. Bush administration, but I sometimes think that Barack Obama is still running Joe Biden's administration.
Well, one interesting thing about the Obama is every time he shows up to the White House, or anytime he's near the White House, the whole system runs towards him and hugs him and wants to see him in power. And people start asking, is Obama going to somehow facilitate someone else into power? Joe Biden's weakness in this system is clear and obvious. His inability to really control the system. Is there. So Barack Obama is still a major player. Let's not forget, Joe Biden would not be in power without if Barack Obama hadn't taken the actions that he'd taken, made the phone calls that he made during the 2020 election to manipulate the Democratic Party and ensure that the voters did not choose Joe Biden. So, to an extent, Joe Biden is Barack Obama's Frankenstein. He created that monster. And now, he's still in control of the monster to some extent. But I guess we will see. When we see Barack Obama come out and start saying things about maybe they should, come to some kind of a diplomatic resolution in Ukraine, that's when it'll happen, in my opinion. And a lot of people are saying that.
Yeah, and in the time left to us, and I'm very grateful to you for your time this evening, in the time left to us, uh, it's not looking good for Donald Trump. The jaws of a highly politicized legal system appear to be closing in on him. Can you give us an update on that?
Sure. There is a discussion about Donald Trump being possibly indicted with a crime, and let's keep this in mind. Two things. Number one, there's a big difference between being indicted of a crime and being convicted of a crime. And if they indict Donald Trump and go after him and don't get a conviction, there's going to be hell to pay. But let me add this: we've seen the same thing that we've seen for the last 5 years. The Trump administration sued for a special magistrate to review all of the documents, and in that lawsuit, in their complaint, they argued there would be leaks from the FBI. Well, they no sooner got it out than the FBI is leaking stuff all over the news, and we've now found that FBI agents literally commanded at the top, the highest level, commanded lower people not to investigate the Hunter Biden laptop. We now know that the FBI went to Mark Zuckerberg and told him, we think that the Hunter Biden stuff might be Russian propaganda, but they knew it wasn't at that time because they had possession of the laptop. They went to Zuckerberg, deliberately lied to Mark Zuckerberg, and influenced him to not run this stuff based on something that they knew was false. So it's obvious that the FBI has not changed since the days of COINTELPRO and Hoover. They're simply an organization that is out to affect politics in America.
You see, I'm running out of time, but I'm fascinated by that nugget that you just produced there. It seems to me of the most immense importance that the American state silenced the entire US media, including US owned social media platforms, on the Hunter Biden story by lying to them that they believed that it was Russian disinformation, that it was a Russian propaganda hoax campaign, when they knew that that was false. It seems to me it cannot get, in a democracy, it cannot get much more serious than that, Garland. You
It can
could
get a
say
little worse.
that was the beginning of the end. The
Yes.
beginning of the end, you could say.
Well, and what's even worse, when Donald Trump was being impeached for that very same incident, they had the hard drive. They knew that Donald Trump was innocent. They knew that he was implicating corruption from the Bidens in Ukraine. They allowed Donald Trump to be impeached, but they had laptops implicating the Bidens for corruption in Ukraine. So not only did they lie to the media when they knew otherwise, they held the information that would have been the deciding factor for even beginning an impeachment. Donald Trump was never going to be convicted, but they had the evidence to know he should not have been impeached in the first place, and they held on to that. This is a very serious, and it should say to Americans, we have to question the democratic principles here, and it appears that there is a preemptive coup going on again for 2024. That's my interpretation of these events.
Do you think they're going to get him, Garland? They're
I
going to
think
get
the
Trump?
I think the idea is whether they get him or not, they're going to keep going after him, regardless of what happens. I think they feel like they'll just throw as much as they can and keep going after him. But I think, as hard as it is to get a conviction on these things, that they're going to charge him with something that's not going to hold, and I think they're not going to get a conviction. But who knows? Again, I'm just speculating. I don't want to be irresponsible.
Garland Nixon, as always, but especially this evening, thank you very much for joining us on the
Thank
mother
you.
of all talk shows.